what authority does my agent have? And what
Okay.
I mean by that is, if you're looking at an agent that has read-only permissions, well, that's not necessarily very highly critical, depending on the information it has access to. But if you have guardrails and it has access to regular information, non-critical, that's a pretty low risk versus an agent that is able to destroy files, edit files, read. These are high value, high action items that need to be locked down. How big is the blast radius? Okay, is this affecting one user or the entire app, or is this moving laterally across your entire enterprise?
Hello, and welcome to Strive, where we make sense of what it means to be cyber ready, one conversation at a time. I'll be your host, Chris Mierzwa, for today's discussion, and I am so happy to be joined again by Werner Nel, Principal, Security and AI Intelligence here at Commvault. And Werner, thanks for being here. We're going to dig into something called MCP today again, aren't we?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we're going to be chatting about is contextually how people are interfacing with today's AI models. I mean, of course, we all do that via either voice or text, but that's not the way enterprises, of course, are executing their interface with that. And they're doing that through something called an MCP server. And Werner has written a white paper, which, believe me, I'm going to request that you go and take a look at that now, but I'll talk about it again at the end, out on our brand new Readyverse page, where it goes into an enormous amount of detail. And today we're just hoping to tease out the excitement so you can go and take a look at that. But Werner, let's start here. There's probably a number of folks listening to this going, MCP 2.0? I must have missed the 1.0 movie. I didn't even see the first one, let alone the sequel. So maybe just a good idea to, can you step us back, talk to us about how MCP kind of came to be and how we've evolved so quickly, by the way, from the 1.0 spec to 2.0.
Right. Yep. So I think that's a great place to start. And if you look at the two models or the two protocols, 1.0 really tells a different story to what 2.0 is telling. So if we look back to what we're trying to achieve with 1.x, it was really necessitated out of the industry needing to come up with the tools and protocols to be able to utilize AI within our organizations, our environments, and empower them to be able to use the tools that we've already created. So the initiative behind 1.0, 1.x was really that flavor of onboarding and adaptation of the technology. The shift of 2.0 is really taking a step back and saying, how can we secure this adoption, right? And really, 2.0 is introduced to answer a basic question of, how can I have AI execute actual work within my enterprise without it creating a security risk? So
Got it.
this is really a movement forward on how we're starting to secure the protocol.
And this jump from V1, V2 spec happened very quick in the grand scheme of most revs. And I guess following the speed at which AI is moving, we're not done here. We're going to continually probably see this kind of evolution and speed for the specification.
Absolutely. And it's a comment I've made in the past to show very clearly that 1.x is really about onboarding us, our technology, to move forward to using AI. And step 2 is really securing those models.
Got it. So in just rounding out an example, so we're just level setting everybody, can you give an example of how this is used at a high level? I know your white paper goes into much more significant detail, but how is this used in practice, a day-to-day?
Okay, so what 2.0 has introduced for us is really 3 foundational changes to the protocol. The first of that is it's bringing to the table support for OAuth. And what OAuth really does is, and I'm going to get some feedback from this, but conceptually how I like to think of OAuth is Active Directory for the internet, right? So what this allows us to do is assign permissions, privileges to specific cryptographic keys and police those. Currently, MCP 1.x, we've been using these cryptographic signatures to verify, but against what authority? OAuth 2.0 brings that standardization in, so we're able to exercise least privilege. The second enhancement that they're bringing to this is structured schemas. Now, structured schemas is a really big thing. It was one of the primary attack vectors for malicious users to try and prompt inject into your environment.
Okay.
Now, what structured schemas do, if I was going to compare that to another technology, again, I would think about parameterized queries within SQL or a whitelist, for instance. And these structures allow you to define specifically what actions a tool is able to do, and anything else it will just ignore. So it's a very important a label, a whitelist of what we're able to do.
You got it.
We can't say it's a little early to tell, but we can't say that's going to completely solve the problem. But it is a very robust way to solve the easy compromise that people had before.
Right. Right. So these are two major additions that did not exist at all in 1.0 spec. Is that correct?
Correct. Not at all. Yeah.
Got it.
And then the third and final enhancement that they've made is introducing this elicitation flow. And what that really gets down to is being able to pause the workflow of any AI agent and interrogate at that point in time. So, think about all the flavors, what we can do just beyond reissuing security credentials because an action needs as high authority, or just getting explicit confirmation to say, yes, this is a high risk action. Do you want to confirm and move forward? Having that mechanism put in place completely changes everything happening autonomously and us needing to log that and try and keep track of what's going on. We're able to now put a pause button on all of our execution flows and control that, which is wildly different to where we were before. And think of all the security pieces you can fit in now by being able to put a pause within a process.
Yeah. I mean, the constructs are there, and now it's probably about maturity, right? I mean, not just within the 2.0 spec, but clearly a launching pad for even future, future schemas and lockdown parameters and all of the things that you're talking about. So, So I think no surprise here. What your white paper talks about is this is fantastic, but it of course does not address everything. There are still things that anybody who's looking at deploying an MCP server needs to keep in mind, because we could be on spec 10 some point from now, and it's still going to be being chased after by the bad guys. So what is it that you're highlighting that the CISOs, that executives who are putting these in need to make sure that their team's aware of the anomalies that still can exist even with this enhanced spec?
So something to understand is that 2.0 is being put in place so that we can dramatically improve our authorization hygiene, our input discipline or sanitization of our inputs. And then again, that is elicitation flow. It does not solve the trust that we put in with our MCP servers themselves. So again, we can't cryptographically prove that an MCP server is the original, is the company that released it. Clones and copies exist. Tools are modified, tools are added, and we have no way of verifying today cryptographically that this is our original MCP server we're interfacing with. So that's a big problem. On top of that, not just signing MCP servers, but signing out tools that those MCP servers can use. Again, that would put up the guardrails of whitelisting exactly the types of actions our agents can take and make. And then finally, it is looking at the environment in which these are executing in. So we're currently facing a problem where a compromised MCP server is full access to the server running that model. So you really have to look at that deployment of what's the blast radius.
Right. If the anomaly occurs, how bad can it still be? So that brings me to something. I'm not saying this about you, Werner, but there's a possibility that the security community as a whole goes, well, sure, but there's still this gaping hole, or there's still an anomaly. And I think a lot of folks who are sitting going, look, I have to balance these AI endeavors that my enterprise is asking for, and I, of course, want to do it securely. And I'm not saying they're going to do this, but they're going to read your white paper and go, oh, my God, no way. We got to at least wait for 3.0 or maybe 4.0 because, this still looks pretty scary. I'm being a little facetious, but can you overcome some of these things? Or in overcoming them, what layers are you proposing to at least be watching out for, putting on top, to make sure that you feel comfortable as you deploy these?
Yeah. So addressing these gaps, there are still many gaps. A lot of those gaps are large. So for the scope of this, it'd be difficult to really knuckle down through that. But for those that are listening, if you really want a keyword list of things to start investigating into, I would absolutely start looking into your network isolation, number one. Look at that blast radius. Secondly, I would start focusing on signing your tools and your binaries that are being used so that you know that those are the correct tools being executed when they're being called by the AI agent. The third thing I would focus on is getting visibility on your runtime environment, really trying to understand what actions are being taken by your AI and producing effective, useful, readable audit logs, something that is actually meaningful for you to deduce what's happening. And the final thing that I would focus on is really looking at these high impact actions that these tools are taking and bring that back and trying to identify where you can bring a human in the loop. And that's going to be very important because a lot of these things execute silently. So it's important for you to understand what's being executed so you can assign those high value actions to high valued privileged accounts for approval.
I see. And so in the paper, again, a little teaser, you go through a risk decision framework for this, right? And, of course, this is your IP. Should they adopt that? Should they look at other things to augment that with? I mean, this is all so new. There's just almost a lack of even where to go. So your white paper is a great start. So say they read that, they say, look, I like this decision framework, which, if you want to go into a little bit, what should be the next step after that? What's the practical step, especially for getting the type of telemetry you're talking about, given so many of these things can happen silently and you don't actually know because there's such a level of automation that's occurring with all of these agents.
Right. Yeah. And really with the infancy of the technology, these frameworks are changing dramatically overnight. So we're always going to play this game of cat and mouse of updating our frameworks, updating our guidelines, and we'll keep doing that. But if I step away from the framework and just explain I've got three questions that I essentially ask myself. And if you repeatedly ask yourself these three questions as you're exercising through AI deployments, you should be coming up with at least highlighting most of the issues that you need to be putting out. The first question I like to ask myself is, what authority does my agent have? And what I mean by that is, if you're looking at an agent that has read-only permissions, well, that's not necessarily very highly critical, depending on the information it has access to. But if you have guardrails and it has access to regular information, non-critical, that's a pretty low risk versus an agent that is able to destroy files, edit files, read. These are high value, high action items that need to be locked down, and identifying that is very important. The next question I ask myself is, how big is the blast radius? Okay, is this affecting one user or the entire app, or is this moving laterally across your entire enterprise? So you've got the full spectrum of impact. How big is your blast radius? And the third question and final question I tend to ask myself is, how reversible is the action being taken?
Interesting.
And again, at accessing information and reading information is completely different to being able to modify, move, lock, delete, etc.
As people give more capability to these agents, and to your point, make it much more difficult if it's executing a chain of events, whether that, make up whatever that is, then all of the things that you are saying just get more pronounced. You have to spend more time focusing on them because it may not be read-only. There may not be easy rollbacks, right? Especially when it's a federated set of events that are taking place in the enterprise or up and down the supply chain for that matter, right? It may even be executing things with partners in different directions. So I get that. So, all right, people have their three pieces. Just a comment about, where things are going in the future, because you spend a lot of time looking at this. So maybe I'm going to ask you to kind of wax fantastic on 3.0. And where do you think this is going? Your best guess is what the next set of things, just so everybody has that sort of in the back of their mind as to what we can expect for the next rev of MCP.
Really, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think we're going to see more focus on gaining visibility on the types of actions that our agents are taking. It's very important for us to start getting a view into this, especially with compliance and regulatory hovering above how we are executing as AI. We need to not only be able to understand and report as how we are operating as an organization, but think about companies and platforms that are offering AI solutions that are doing all of their due diligence, and a compromise happens to one of their customers that are using the tool. You need to have the granularity and the visibility in your network to say, hey, my product was not part of this attack in terms of a third-party supply chain attack. So being able to govern over your own information is absolutely critical, not only to protect yourself from a compliance standpoint, but also from being able to protect yourself from a customer standpoint to show you've done your due diligence. And 2.0 is really that step moving in that direction to say we're going to start gaining visibility. We're going to start putting these elicitation flows in place so we can pause, log, see what's happening, verify, authenticate. We have to rinse and repeat. We spent 20 years trying to secure how software is developed securely, and AI is not going to get a shortcut to this because it's new to the party. We're going to have to revisit all of these same vectors that we did for the past 20 plus years.
Yeah, and probably cause quite an interesting wave through existing security tools, and maybe, don't get excited, everybody, maybe some consolidation in the security space. Can you imagine? I mean, what a miracle that would be. And that was the last thing I wanted to ask you, Werner. Your opinion on the commercial maturity of this MCP space as we move forward. What do you see happening there? Because right now, I mean, there are a lot of players starting. Do you think we'll see a lot of activity over the next couple of years? Do you think it'll come from the substantiated security vendors, or do you think it's going to come from, net new startups that possibly get enveloped, purchased, whatnot, to the largers? But how do you see this probably shaking out?
It's a tough call, honestly. I think it is going to come from smaller vendors. And the reason behind that is because if we look back to like the early 2010s, the same way we treated cloud environments, the assumption was AWS handles all my security for me, or this tool handles all this. And we've learned, not to their fault, but it takes more than that. It takes these third-party applications to bolster and secure environments. And I don't think that's really going to be any different to moving forward with AI.
Got it. So let me summarize for all those listening. If you thought you had a good 150 security tools in the enterprise, Werner's giving you 151, right? Maybe just a couple, but just add a few more onto the pile. But if it's going to do all the things you're talking about, it's clearly going to be a requirement. I mean, you're going to have to make way for it, right? So, Werner,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. I just want to make sure everybody knows, please visit our Readyverse site and take a look at Werner's white paper. It is absolutely a masterclass. And we've just scratched the surface here having this discussion, but it goes into a ton more depth. And I think it goes without saying, Werner, we're going to probably have multiple iterations of this, of course, as MCP matures, and we'll keep that as a rolling document for folks to be able to look at. And that goes for everything that we have out on our readyverse.com site. You're going to be able to find white papers like Werner's, self-assessment tools, and decision-making videos, blogs, and additional papers that I'm mentioning to help make your enterprise more resilient. So thank you for joining us today for this Strive podcast, and we'll look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks again, Werner.
Thanks for having me.